So we've talked a lot about creativity. We've talked a lot about research. What do you think the value of strategy today is?
I think the value of strategy today is the same as it was before. And I think what's been challenging is to be able to take the time and space to be strategic. And ultimately, strategy is what it always has been, which is deciding what not to do. It's about being choiceful. And at times that's really, really hard, especially given today's business climate and pressure to have short-term thinking instead of long-term thinking. But when done right, strategy is about making choices that are hard, but that are going to be ultimately what helps you grow the business.
Yeah, and I definitely think the idea of that reducing down to what is only essential is lost a lot nowadays. And I think the reality is that when that's done, you find a lot more efficiencies how to communicate better with your clients and how to get better work done. But I also just think there's so much energy and activity that's happening right now. There's so much further that we have to do all this stuff that if you use strategy correctly, if you actually do pare down what you want to do, you can be more focused and you can be a lot more effective. And I don't see that always happening, unfortunately.
Exactly. And with budgets getting tighter and tighter and being asked to accomplish more with the budgets that you have, strategy and being strategic, if you will, and I'm not saying it has to be the strategist who does it or the planner who does it, but the whole team has to be thoughtful and choiceful around what they decide to do now and what they decide they're going to defer to do another time, right?
Yeah. And so how do you think that can be applied to sort of the larger spectrum of work that many clients are doing? Because just as we talked about, there's so many activities going on, right? And there's and a lot of it is keeping up with the Joneses. Some of it is just the desire, the need that they believe that these activities have to happen. And more often than not, it just leads to a lot of chaos in organizations that they're trying to boil the ocean. And not to say that there's as we talked about earlier, the difference between digital strategists, media strategists, and brand strategists. But there's this idea of just overall strategic thinking. How can we apply that more to help focus across the organization?
Ultimately, and again, this is not a sexy answer because this is not like it's not new thinking. So what I'm going to say is kind of obvious probably to a lot of our viewers or listeners, which is you need to tie it to the business objective and what the need is for the brand, right? Ultimately, because we're in advertising and marketing communications. Like we do what we do to help our clients connect with their audiences and ultimately sell. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but here we go. So I think to accomplish that, you have to always be tuned into what is the business need, what is the business objective. And we can't be afraid to have those conversations. And I think the more that agencies can truly reconnect with that sense of stewardship and agency on behalf of clients and brands, the better they can serve clients and the better work that will result in it, I think, ultimately.
I agree entirely. And the only sort of overlay I'd put on top of that would be the idea of also making sure it's relevant to your core consumer. Because I think oftentimes the scales tip back and forth between we're doing all this work out of these particular activities because that's what the consumer wants or that's what the brand needs or perceived as what the brand needs. But I do think, getting to that idea of whether it's an external agency, an internal agency, being the stewards to the core of the brand and what efforts they need to do in order to do your business well, I think it is the key to balance those two things out.
So we're agreeing too much, though. There's no controversy in this conversation.
Well, it's okay. I honestly think that to a certain extent, people expect there to be a grind between the two disciplines. That doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot of things, but one thing I haven't gotten out of you yet is how would you like to work with creatives, or how do you like to work with creatives?
Yeah. So I work with creatives a lot, and one of the things that I like to do is get in really early with them. So as soon as I know that we're going to be collaborating, I try to get on board with reading the brief. So give me the brief. Let me know what is the problem that the creative strategy is trying to solve, the creative team is trying to solve. And I like to work directly with the creative team. And I only realized this since starting my own company. I realized that different companies have different cultures around that. And there is, with some marketing clients, a hesitation or a concern about having the researcher talk to or speak with the creatives, right? And it's understandable because there's a concern about the fox watching the hen house. They don't want them influencing the objective researcher, which I totally get, and I understand that's a concern. But I don't think it's a concern that you really need to worry too much about. So as a researcher, I come in, I work with the clients and the creatives so that I can understand what was the creative brief, what are the ways the different creative campaign concepts are trying to solve for the brief or solve the problem, so that I have internalized and understand what are the creatives trying to achieve. So I actually try to engage them in dialogue really early and involve the creative team in helping me as the researcher understand what's the intention behind the idea. Because then I can better help them through the research process when I'm talking to consumers, when we're doing a communications check on the campaign ideas. I can advise the creative team, this is the ways that your creative idea is working, but the consumers, for example, are interpreting this campaign in a different way than you intended, and here's why.
So that's from a validation and testing perspective, right?
Yes.
Which is great, and I totally agree with you. I like to be involved with the strategist as much as possible and the researcher when it comes to that, when we're testing and validating creative thoughts. But let's go to when we're developing creative. How do you like to work with the creatives at that point? When you're actually helping find those strategic insights through research.
This is just my style. Every planner and strategist is a little bit different in how they like to work. So I'm not saying the way I do it is the only way at all. It just happens to be the method that works for me. Because I'm very my bias, if you will, and my thought process goes through the mind of the user or the mind of the consumer. So I tend to sort of be naturally grounded in sort of what do we understand about the target audience we're speaking to? What do I know about the context of their lives and how they live and what their relationship is with the category or with my brand, for example. So in a way, Theo, I have a very sort of methodical, boring process of doing that. So I like to kind of get armed and immersed in the business objective and the consumer or the audience context on behalf of the creative team. And then that way I can tell that story to you as the creative director and say, this is the story of the person you're writing for. So I think that's no, I'm not saying that's the right way. It's just the way that's works for me.
And honestly, it's I agree. I don't want to sit on a researcher's lap and have them show me all the things that they're thinking about and digesting and consuming.
Right.
I have better things to do sometimes, but when you get to the end of that process, right, when you're distilling that into sort of an actionable thing for the team, do you like to sit down and write the brief with them?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually do. And again, I actually don't know if that's how other planners or strategists work. You might actually have an insight about that. But I like to have a POV on what it is. So I'll usually, when we work together, I came to you with the brief. I said, Theo, what do you think about that? And then we bash our heads together a bit, and we usually make it better. Because remember, the audience for the creative brief is actually the creative team. And I tell that to clients whenever they are listening to me about that the brief ultimately is for the creatives so that the marketer can inspire them to do the work. The marketing client ultimately is not the audience for the brief. And that's a little tricky sometimes to manage because there are other people who want to see the brief. But from a pure sort of creative brief standpoint, I found it's best to limit who sees it and that we just gently remind our clients always that it's for your creative team. It's really not useful for general consumption.
I agree 100%. Honestly, my favorite relationship with strategists over the years, and that I've continued to sort of hone in most of the practices that I have, is that my strategist will take the first pass at the brief, and then we will sit down and rewrite it together. And then at the end of that, I will often bring in one of the lead creatives that will be involved in it and actually bounce it off them. And hopefully they've been also exposed to some of the
Yeah.
research from beforehand. Not always possible, but it's almost a little QA check.
There's a lot of effort in those steps, but I think it's a good quality control and a quality assurance process, like you said. But I also know, I remember when we were working together on one of the clients, and you and I bashed back and forth quite a bit on it. So there's a give and take. There's going to be a little tension when you're working with your creative team on developing, or your creative director, if you will, when you're developing the creative brief, but it always results in a tighter brief and one that's going to help get your team excited. Because really, ultimately, what the planner is doing is when you're socializing the brief with your creative team before it's blessed and approved, you're socializing it in a way that helps get your team thinking about it already.
Oh, just another thing we totally agree on.
Oh,
Man.
great.